Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole. COVID lockdowns accelerated changes to our eating habits, so this week I'm finding out whether or not the food industry is managing to keep up and how seasonal consumption could help cut budgets and save the planet. Stretched supply chains, why millennials may need to say adios to smashed avocados. Feeding immunity, how nutrition and a curb on carbs could help fight COVID. And from Spring Festival to spring rolls, how Chinese cuisine continues to please our palates. The food we eat gives our bodies the information, the materials it needs to function properly. If we don't get the right information, our metabolic processes suffer and our health declines. Consuming too much food or food that gives our bodies the wrong instructions can lead us to becoming overweight or even undernourished and at risk of developing diseases and conditions such as diabetes and heart disease. Lockdowns are expected to have exacerbated these. Gym closures combined with comfort eating to cope with the stress proved, well, less than favourable for our figures. In short, what we eat is central to our health. But all too often, the uneven distribution of food has meant some have too much, while others have too little, or the wrong kind. A report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world says as many as 660 million people could still face hunger in 2030 due to insecurity caused by the pandemic. 30 million more people than if COVID hadn't arrived. In 2020, 1 in 10 people on the planet still went hungry. Meanwhile, a global study from The Lancet estimates that for the first time, obesity in children and adolescents will surpass those who are underweight. Ironically, it's more severe in developing countries. Supply chain struggles since COVID has put the spotlight very firmly on food we eat not from our own country. On average, supermarket produce travels 1,500 miles before reaching our supermarket baskets. And the longer between farm and plate, the less nutrition left for us. With an estimated 10 billion mouths to feed by 2050, ensuring a healthy diet for all without harming the planet remains food for thought. To talk about this dilemma, I'm joined by Professor Chris Elliot, and Chris is founding director of the Institute for Global Food Security. Chris, given the growing population and perhaps shrinking resources, just how ready is the UK and Europe for future food demand?
It's a very good question on a very important topic. And if we think about those extra 2 billion mouths, we've had to feed an extra 2 billion mouths that have come onto the planet just in the last decade as well. So it is a huge challenge, and we're doing that against a backdrop of climate change in a very polluted planet, massive issues about sustainability. So in the context of the UK, I personally say we are not in a particularly good place. Just in the 1970s, we could produce 70% of all the food that we eat, and now it's about 50%. And the trend is continuing to be, let's import more food and let's produce less at home.
So what are the most urgent changes governments today and in the future have to make, or in the short term, perhaps?
There has to be the decisions about science and technology, for instance. Well, I will say that because I'm a scientist, but there are so many things we could do in terms of improving our production, so many things we could do to make foods in terms of improving the nutrients that are involved in them. And a lot of those things people have shied away for because, again, it's back to politics. Do people really want to adopt things like GM foods and gene editing, the use of robotics, the use of things like hydroponics, which are incredibly elegant ways where we can boost our food production here and actually reduce our environmental footprint at the same time.
So is European agriculture too old-fashioned?
For many, many years, we have had a system in Europe where farmers have been subsidized, and the subsidies have been about not innovating. It has been absolutely counter to what we really should have been doing right across Europe for a long period of time. Now, that is changing, and changing very quickly. We've got the big green agenda in Europe now trying to say is that farmers have to change the way that they do things, and subsidies should be based about environmental footprint, about producing more with less inputs now. I mean, the biggest dangers on our planet are absolutely the change to our climate. And in my institute, we monitor crop failures, and we just see more and more of them happening in different parts of the world. So what we've got to do is to build in Europe and in the UK much better systems to feed ourselves going forward.
Is it possible to have an equitable distribution of food around the world?
Well, Stephen, there's nearly 8 billion people on the planet, and the stats will show about 1 billion people are currently undernourished. They don't get enough food, yet there's more than enough food produced in the world to feed 8 billion people. So there is massive issues about the equality of our global food supply system. We waste so much of it. In fact, we waste about a third of all that we produce. Even just to tackle food waste, you can see would have such a dramatic impact, particularly in developing countries.
You can go to any supermarket in Britain and in many places in Europe, and you'll see foods from all over the world in front of you. Many years ago, you would only eat food from that season. So is that the problem? And I wonder whether the pandemic has highlighted this problem of bringing in so much food from different parts of the world.
Yeah, the food system really over the last decade has been truly globalized. It's the world's true global industry. Quite often we don't know what we eat. We don't know where it comes from. We don't know how it's being produced. And I often use strawberries. Why should we possibly think that we can eat strawberries 365 days a year? Because the environmental footprint of us eating strawberries in November, December, January, it's shocking, because they have been transported very, very long distances. So getting back to eating local food produced at different times of the year should also be part of what we think about in terms of a sustainable food system.
Can I ask you too about some of the scandals that you've highlighted? I'm thinking about the horse meat scandal and others. Are there still scandals to be uncovered, do you think?
Well, that's my day job, actually, Stephen. I look at problems in the global food supply system. We look at points of vulnerability where fraud might happen, and we see fraud happening 365 days of the year in lots and lots of different foodstuffs and food commodities and food ingredients, because you can make more money out of food fraud than you can out of heroin trade. There's more money made out of food fraud than heroin. So just put that into context. It's not going to disappear overnight for sure.
And if we can sort of go back to sustainability, and I wonder if sustainability is considered enough by governments and the policy makers. In other words, can we consume food sustainably, i.e. without harming the planet?
Well, the answer is that's exactly what we have to do. There isn't a plan B here. No famous government plan Bs for this one. But it takes really brave leadership, because to eat food sustainably will probably mean the cost of food will increase. And there's all of the social issues around that. It probably means, as you and I were talking about, less choices of food. But it is a must. We must deliver a sustainable food system for the planet. There is no other option.
The UK recently published its first food security report in a decade. And during those 10 years, we've seen both Brexit and COVID. What were the report's findings, the main findings?
Well, really, I mean, I very much welcome the fact that after a decade, we're coming to the place where we've got a food security plan. But also, we have published a national food strategy not so long ago, and there seems to be variances in terms of what the national food strategy says and the food security strategy. So I think that really has to come together. In terms of Brexit, all that has done is it has highlighted the fact that we import so much food from Europe particularly fresh produce. What COVID has shown is the complexity of the global food supply system, where suddenly, because the container ships are out of place, because people in developing worlds are getting badly affected by COVID, suddenly food supplies are changing. And the gaps on the supermarket shelves were very, very apparent for a number of months. And despite all of those massive issues, our food industry in the UK was really able to step up to the mark and fill those shelves. Will they be able to do the same thing 1, 2, 3 years from now? I have more doubts about it.
I'm a little older than a millennial is, Chris, and I'm wondering whether some of the foods millennials love, I'm talking about smashed avocado, may well have to perhaps take a back seat to foods that are grown more in the UK and Europe. In other words, we might have to change our diets in future.
Well, I think we're all going to have to change our diets. And highlighting avocados is a very good example, actually, because most of the world's avocados are grown in California. California has a massive water deficit, yet they're using huge amounts of water to produce avocados so they can export it. The reason they do it is to get so much money for it. So I think in terms of what we are doing, in fact, we have founded an organization called Foundation Earth. What we want to do is have on every food produce in the UK a label to talk about its sustainability credentials. And I think that will surprise many people in terms of how sustainable some foodstuffs really are.
Professor Chris Elliot, many thanks for joining us here on The Agenda.
My pleasure.
Since the arrival of the pandemic, we've been encouraged to maintain a strong immune system to help fight against COVID and, of course, any other viruses that are out there. And nutritious foods can play a key role in boosting our immunity. To find out more about the powers of nutrition, I'm joined by Sally Poon. And Sally is a registered personal dietitian based in Hong Kong. What's your advice then about a nutritious diet, i.e. a balanced diet, a healthy diet, whatever you like to call it? What should we be eating?
Well, we should be having what's so-called like a balanced diet means everything in moderation. So we get our, first of all, macronutrients from carbohydrate, from fats, and from protein, of course, and everything in moderation. Now, these days, people do argue, okay, are we eating too much carbohydrate? And some people will go for a low-carb diet these days for weight loss, for example. But I would suggest we would not go for too much in carbohydrate, because these days, look, we are going through COVID-19 pandemic. So our activity level in general are way lower than previous. So we are exercising less. So that means we don't have that much quota to overdo with the carbohydrate. So because eating too much carbohydrate, especially the refined carbohydrate from white rice, white bread, or even the sugar or sodas, sugary beverages, they are related to increase the glucose in our body. And having too high in the blood glucose, blood insulin, or triglyceride, and these are associated with type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So watch out the carbs.
So carbs can be bad for you. Can some carbs be good for you?
Of course, because some carbs are higher in fiber content depending on their, the processing. So for example, we do encourage people to opt for more low glycemic index grains, which means they are whole grains. So it could be like brown rice, red rice, wild rice, whole wheat, whole grain pastas, whole wheat bread, those kind of things. And eat more lentils and legumes, and they're naturally higher in fiber. So these things, they are better for our glucose control, insulin, and maybe they're better for weight management as well, because they give you, fuller for longer. You feel fuller for longer.
Obesity is an increasing problem in the West. In China, I don't know if I'm making a generalization, but there seems to be a lot less obesity in China. Is that simply because of diet?
I would say it could be the reasons for obesity. Let's put it this way. There are many reasons leading to obesity. It could be genetic, it could be some medical reasons, but majority of the obesity are contributed by sedentary lifestyle and overeating in terms of the calorie intake. And possibly in general, you know, people in China, in Asia, maybe possibly that we have more exercise in general. We walk more maybe instead of driving door to door. It could be one of the reasons. And traditional Chinese diet, it is, you know, it is made up of plenty of fruit and vegetables.
Right. Well, that's the key, isn't it? Because it's about the type of food you're eating, rather more than perhaps the quantity.
Yes, yes. In general, traditional Chinese, we eat more fruit and vegetables, and we maybe do more exercise as well. But I have to say that, you know, the obesity trend could be in an increasing trend as well in Asia, in China too, just because in the sedentary lifestyle these days. Because in the previous, they do more farming in China. Let's put it this way.
Okay.
So,
well, in the West, we're not going out as much as we did, mainly because of lockdowns. And as a result, people are eating a lot of takeaways. Now, takeaway in Britain and in parts of Europe is often used as a treat, you know, once a week, once a fortnight. But now a lot of people are doing or eating takeaways almost on a daily basis. And they're notorious for their high levels of salt and sugar. Are they a serious risk to health, do you think? And how much nutrition would there be in an average takeaway?
Well, it depends. For example, like a Chinese takeaway, for example, if you're ordering like a decent portion of fried rice or fried noodles, it could be like over 1,000 calories based on some database. So I would say takeaway, the downside of takeaway could be, first of all, the portion size in general is quite big. Secondly, it could be loaded with sodium and fat, and depending on the cooking methods as well.
Is there a way of keeping track of the amount of salt and sugar you are consuming in your diet?
Well, if you want to keep track on, you know, the amount of sodium and fat that you're taking, I would suggest, like, you know, look at the food label at all time if that's available. Right. Now, some restaurants, they do provide the nutrition labeling on their menu. Do you think
they should put that nutrition level on the menu?
I think so too. I definitely agree with this, and I think the government, the Department of Health, should push a little bit on this, you know, action. It's just because the world is changing with this pandemic. Our eating habit is changing dramatically, and people relying on more takeaways these days. So that's
very worrying, isn't it?
Yes, of course. So if they, and also I think customer, we deserve to know what's actually in it, just like the pre-packed products that we get from supermarkets. So yeah, I think, you know, that's something we should, you know, do in the near future.
Another trend alongside takeaways, the increase in popularity of takeaways, especially during lockdown, is vegetarianism, veganism. Do you get a sufficient balanced diet from veganism or vegetarianism?
Well, plant-based diets can be healthy, and research shows that they can help reduce the chance of chronic disease such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and certain type of cancers. However, you should plan your plant-based diet carefully because some nutrients could fall short easily. For example, you can get adequate amount of protein from tofu, tempeh, legumes and lentils. And you can also opt for quinoa as part of your carbs intake. But pay attention to those commercially made vegan meat substitute, because those products could be loaded with sodium and fat. And also pay attention vegan, because vegan, they don't eat eggs or dairy. Now this type of diet can fall short on vitamin B12. So make sure vegan get vitamin B12 supplementation, or they pay more attention to these breakfast cereal fortified beverages. Like for example, B12 fortified orange juice in the supermarket. So they need to supplement with B12.
Sally, you look very healthy and very well. So how do you manage that? What do you eat?
What do I eat? Well, first of all, I would say to keep myself healthy, try to eat regularly regular meal pattern is the key, and it keeps your digestion healthy as well.
Right.
Now we're talking about immune system. Majority of our immune system is actually located in our gut, because our gut, the microbiota in our gut, is in charge of our a lot of our immune system. So make sure we are going to the toilet regularly, and make sure our gut is healthy, in good shape. Then your immunity should be in a good shape as well. And also don't forget that a lot of our nutrition is absorbed through our small intestine. So if you have a good gut health, your nutrition is absorbed properly, and that will lead to good health and good skin.
Sally Poon, many thanks to you for joining us on The Agenda.
Thank you.
Still to come here on The Agenda, I'll be meeting the manager of an iconic London restaurant to hear why Cantonese cuisine will always leave us wanting more. Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The China Tang restaurant here at the Dorchester Hotel in London is home to some of the finest, authentic Cantonese food to be found outside China. China Tang bears the unmistakable fingerprint of the flamboyant creator, Sir David Tang. The theme of the restaurant is olden days Shanghai, but the bar here is based on a 1930s imagination of Sir David's living room, where if you want to, you can also experience a Cantonese afternoon tea. In here, the dining room is served classical Cantonese dishes using the freshest ingredients to showcase centuries of perfected recipes, from the dim sum menus to favourites such as mapo tofu, yu xiang aubergine, and my favourite succulent char siu pork, including the ultimate centrepiece though, Peking duck. This place is a genuine celebration of Cantonese cooking. And I'm going to meet the man in charge, John Mann. What do you eat, or what do you serve during Chinese New Year?
We don't have a New Year's menu, but we will have New Year's specials, which will include the auspicious dishes, sea moss, dried oysters. Again, is a homophone. Dried oyster in Chinese, fat hou xi, means good times. Sea moss is fat choy. That means it's a homophone for getting rich. We Chinese we're obsessed about good fortune. So you've got to have fish.
Why fish?
The word fish in Chinese, yu, also means abundance. So, when you have a fish dish, we always preface it with a little couplet, nin nin yao yu. That means every year we'll have abundance. So if you eat the fish, you're going to have abundance in the year ahead.
And what are the most popular dishes with your customers?
Favorites, we have Peking duck, which is not a Cantonese dish, but we do it very well. A lot of people from Hong Kong have exclaimed, this is actually better than, I wouldn't say Beijing, but better than Hong Kong. We use ducks from Ireland. And the interesting thing is the company, I won't name because, actually export to China now. So, because of the fat to meat ratio is perfect for Peking duck, for instance. Yeah. So they've got a very big market in China.
Are your recipes, your menus adapted for a Western palate?
I would say no. Our chef's pedigree is from Hong Kong. Hong Kong has always been quite an international place.
And with a huge choice.
Absolutely. Well. For instance, seafood in Hong Kong is usually flapping and alive before it's cooked. But here, we use sea bass, we use turbot, and we use brill. It works.
Very hungry.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sorry we couldn't make you it now.
Brill and turbot are lovely.
Absolutely, but the techniques of cooking, i.e. steaming, the pan frying, and the flavors involved will make it quintessentially Chinese.
Chinese food is very personal. You were saying your chef chooses how much he how much flavoring he will put in, how many herbs, how many spices, how much salt, etc. So you were really very dependent on the quality of a good chef.
Yeah, it's not like baking where you'd measure to the nearest milliliter or gram, but it is more or less there. You know, the chefs are very skilled at using the wok ladle to dose out the seasoning, the salt, the soy sauce, the sesame oil, etc.
People these days are increasingly conscious of healthy eating.
Absolutely.
Have you had to change your menus to deal with that?
I've always been of the opinion Chinese food is intrinsically healthy because, for instance, you know, traditionally, for instance, 200 grams of beef in a Western restaurant would serve one diner, but in a Chinese dinner setting, they would serve 4 or 5 because meat's almost treated as a condiment because of necessity. You know, China's had scarcity in the past. For instance, you know, a typical stir-fried dish would be maybe 40% vegetables.
Veganism is increasingly popular too.
In Asia, we've always had a long tradition of vegetarianism. You know, if you're a Buddhist, you know, some people abstain from meat and fish. So, you know, we do have a big variety of meat substitute dishes. The Chinese always liked, even if you're a vegetarian in the Far East, you want to eat something which resembles a duck, resembles a fish. So we've found there's a little bit of clash of culture here because a lot of vegetarians here, if it resembles a fish, it's offensive.
Why is that?
I don't know.
That's very honest.
Yeah, we had, for one New Year, we had something called a taro cake made with yam, minced yam. And it was shaped in the mold of a fish. And some clients kind of said, oh, no, I don't like that. It looks too much like the real thing. Yeah, interesting.
John, that was great. Lovely talking to you. Have a great new year.
Thank you. Kong hee fa choi.
Kong hee fa choi. There's no doubt the pandemic changed our relationship with food. Supply chain problems made shoppers more aware that their favourite foods may not always be available, something we used to take for granted. And during lockdowns, many people found themselves eating more convenience foods, which meant more calories but often less nutrition. Remember that in many parts of the world, people were told not to leave their homes. In parts of Asia, for example, some were cooped up for 76 days. The worst was in the Philippines, where children were forbidden from going outside for more than a year. These were some of the most draconian pandemic lockdowns youngsters had to bear. And as those children sat still at home for long periods of time, often in front of a screen, childhood obesity spiked. And if that trend continues this year, obesity rates in children and adolescents will surpass those underweight for the first time. Many people think that children carrying extra weight are found only in wealthy countries, but in fact, 27% of the world's overweight children under the age of 5 live in Africa, and 48% are in Asia. Some of the poorer countries are now facing a double epidemic of both malnutrition and obesity, which often coexist in the same community and sometimes even in the same household. And that's why I expect to see more countries increasing taxes on sugary drinks, pushing for more exercise in schools, and to start treating obesity as a disease, which, according to the World Health Organization, it is, rather than a personal failure. For the youngest sufferers, the earlier things can be turned around, the greater the chances that they'll grow up to enjoy a longer, healthier and happier life. And that would be a real cause for celebration. Don't forget you can watch everything from past Agenda episodes and find additional exclusive content on our website, cgtn.com/Europe, or on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @CGTN Europe. Coming up on a future agenda, fighting fraud, why more must be done to tackle a $1 trillion crime. But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.